Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to one of our series of webinars. This one is focused on exams, really timely because exams are about to start. We'll just wait a minute while people join, and then I will introduce you to those who are going to be delivering the webinar with me. So we'll just wait a second. If you want, please do say hello in the comments. It's really nice to know that we're talking to people. I know a lot of you will be watching it back, but if you want to say hi, just look at the comments and just say hello. Lovely to hear from and your context, perhaps if you're a parent, home educator, student. Hello, everybody. Good, nice to see some of you saying hello. So we've waited a minute, so I'm going to start. I'll introduce myself, and please do keep saying hello. I'll just say wave as they come in. My name's Esther Chesterman. I'm the CEO of the National Extension College. We often have a series of webinars that we deliver through the year. And I'm delighted to be joined by Lucie Wheeler from RECAP, and I'll hand over to Lucie in a minute to explain a little bit more about RECAP. And for our Q&A session, I'm introducing Louise Tolhurst, who's our Exams and Assessment Manager at the National Extension College. So Lou will join us for the Q&A in case there's questions, particularly that I can't answer, which is highly likely. So thank you. Lucie, thank you for joining us. Do you want to explain a little bit about you and recap your organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me here today. So, hi everyone. My name is Lucie Wheeler, and as Esther said, I am the founder of RECAP, which is a research-based organisation. RECAP actually stands for Research in Education, Child Development and Parenting. So it encompasses everything that is within the field of the research that I do. In addition to running RECAP, I'm also a researcher at Anglia Ruskin University in their School of Education, and I'm in my third year of my PhD study with them. I'm actually looking at the home educator identity, so looking at that duality between being your child's parent and also being your child's educator. And I'm hoping to really hone in on what support you guys need so that we can get some better support and resources out there for you. And it's also worth saying, I think it's really important to know that I was a home educated parent myself. My daughter is now 18, so she is out the other side, but we access GCSEs as a private candidate. So I come from a professional and research interest in this topic, but also from a personal parental aspect as well.
Lovely. Thank you, Lucie. I'm really, really pleased that you've been able to join us with that wide range of experience that you've got that you'll bring to the conversation. I'll just tell you a little bit if you don't know about the National Extension College. So we're an online distance learning provider. We've been in operation now for 60 years. Would you believe it? Obviously not online to begin with, but as a traditional correspondence college. We do specialise in GCSEs and A-levels, so we offer really flexible education courses and programmes for those who are looking to access education in a slightly different way. And we've seen a real growth in home educators choosing flexible learning like the one that we deliver. So it's really good to be able to communicate with the community. And really, as you say, Lucie, it's a two-way. It's understanding what the community, the home education community wants from us as well as a provider in that sector. And Louise, are you okay just to introduce yourself and your role within the National Extension College?
Yeah, so I'm Louise and I'm the Exams and Assessment Manager. So I deal with our partnership exam centres, so we can guarantee all of our students a place at one of our partnership centres across the UK. And a big part of that is dealing with students that have got access arrangements, so giving out sort of pre-application advice and making sure that people are aware, particularly parents, as to what evidence may be required for their child's examinations, and just making sure we get collecting that evidence as early as possible in order to guarantee the access arrangements that the individual needs.
Brilliant. Thank you, Louise. So, Louise, you're going to hop off while Lucie and I have a conversation around some of the more overarching points around how you can access the examinations within a private candidate situation. And then Louise will join us for the Q&A. We've already used a few key words here, haven't we, Lucie? Private candidate, access arrangements. Hopefully all of those will become clear as we move through the conversation. I've noted Q&A a lot as well, so there is a question and answer session at the end. Either just make some notes of some questions you might have throughout the session, or if you do want to type it straight away, if you put Q at the beginning of it, and then the administrator count in the background will go back to it and then highlight it on the screen, and we'll know that question's been asked. If there's anything incredibly pertinent, I might bring it in at that moment, but generally we'll save them all for the end. And it's lovely to see Scotland, lots of Scotland, west of Wales. Really nice that you're saying where you're from, so thank you. It's lovely to travel around the United Kingdom with you. Right, so we'll start off. We'll probably be about 30 to 40 minutes. Lots to get through. We could talk about this for hours, Lucy, and in our sessions leading up to it, we've had some really lovely conversations, and I've been fascinated about the areas of research. The first overarching question we thought we'd gather around was, why does access to examinations matter so much? And it's really around what that feels like for a home educated parent and student, and also that aspect around access arrangements as well. So what, as a home educator and through your research, why is it so important that you really understand how to access examinations?
Yeah, I think it's so important to know what's out there, and really important to know how to navigate it and how to access it. I think this is one of the core concerns of home educators, is actually knowing where to find the information out, where to go, what to look for. And that's actually a lot of the work that drives behind RECAP, is making information accessible, simplifying it, removing the jargon, and highlighting to people where they can go to find out reliable, trusted information, because it's a bit of a minefield out there. And if you are new to home education as well, and this is your first child or your first experience going through something like exams, it can be incredibly overwhelming. And like I said, I've been through this as a parent. I remember that feeling when I was like, oh my goodness, I don't even know where to look. I don't know what to do. How do I even know what to teach? Like, so many questions. But thinking about what exam access looks like for a home educated student, this really differs significantly between a school-based student and a home educated learner, particularly in how exams are arranged, how they're funded, how they're supported, things like that. So I think some of the key things to consider. So looking at registration and access to exams, for example. So a school-based learner, the school automatically registers the students for the exams. The exams are taken at the school, which is already an approved centre. Timetables, exam materials, invigilation, all handled by the school. Okay, but a home educated learner, they need to self-register at an approved exam centre, or you could be a private candidate at your local school. But again, the school doesn't have to accept you as a private candidate, so it's finding where you can do it, which is a task in itself. So you need to kind of do all of this well in advance as well. It's not kind of a last minute thing, so there needs to be an element of preparation. And as I said, not all centres accept private candidates, especially, and we'll come on to this later, if there is a practical or coursework element to the exam as well. So that can cause some challenges with that. Other things to consider when talking about accessing exams, the costs and funding. I know this is very much a hot topic when I speak to any family about accessing exams. So again, school-based learners, exam fees are usually covered by the school. Additional costs may apply, but they're often subsidised, so they don't need to worry about that element of it. But home educated learners, the families must pay for the exams themselves, and these can be quite substantial. And especially, if you're taking 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 exams, if you're replicating in the school system and taking lots and lots of GCSEs, this can go easily into thousands and thousands of pounds, and that needs to be subsidised by the parents. The costs can be increased for elements such as practicals or coursework, or if there are multiple papers or components, that just increases the prices. And then any additional costs, which we'll come on to talk more about in a moment, access arrangements, all an additional cost for the home educating family as well. So again, talking about that access to them, that's something that needs to be considered. Thinking from a support and preparation lens, school-based learners, they receive structured teaching, mock exams, revision sessions, access to school resources. The teachers help with exam technique, coursework submissions, special arrangements, you know, the list goes on. When you're a home educating family, this all falls on you to organise, to arrange all of your own study materials, if you're choosing to use a tutor or online courses, distance learning, online learning, things like that. And you may find it challenging to get some support for the coursework or the NEA, so the non-exam assessment element of the programme as well. So again, that element of access to it needs to be considered. Just touching on access arrangements before we talk about it in a little bit more depth. Oh, I don't know what's happened to my camera.
Ooh. Hi everyone. I think unfortunately Lucie's just dropped out for a second. I think she was having some connection issues. So I'll just pick up on a couple of points that she's just mentioned. We at NEC, we do often find that students who are coming to us and parents coming to us, perhaps the child has stepped out of school or stepped out of traditional education. It does become quite overwhelming, the exam aspect, because obviously schools would organise all of that for you. Obviously organisations like ourselves try and replicate that quite seamless experience for you. Costs and funding, we'll come on to legal aspects in a second if Lucie's able to rejoin us. But one of the issues that the previous government was looking at was how to ensure local authorities did put forward a provision that everybody who wanted to sit an exam in a local authority did have that opportunity. Now that was shelved by the previous government, and we do lobby as an organisation, have lobbied for years to try and ensure that access to examinations is available for anyone who wants to. It's really, you know, the fact that a child has actually got to a point where they're able and ready to sit exam, the aspect of having that exam available to them should not be the barrier. There's so many barriers to getting to that point where learning, knowledge and skills are ready to be examined and assessed. So we lobby often to ensure that that access to the actual examination is available and is ready. I'm going to move on to a couple of other areas. Hopefully Lucie will be able to join us again. One of the aspects that we were going to talk about was also legal rights and the application process. So from an aspect of what home educating families are entitled to. So Lucie is the expert in that. There will be some areas on her website that picks up on those aspects. We often deal a lot with students with education, health and care plans. This is probably a very separate hour that we could have a discussion around this. But most likely if a child, a young person has an EHCP, then there would be funding provision within that for an examination if they're following a general education course. So that's whether they're following a GCSE or an A-level, or sometimes a functional skills qualification as well. And if you're working with an organisation such as ours, then we would support that whole aspect of ensuring that the EHCP funding. We've just moved on, Lucie, very pleased you've come back. So I was just moving on to segment 2, talking about the application process and legal rights and funding, which you touched on before. I'd picked up on EHCPs where funding might be available for the examination. And I said that's probably another hour we could talk about EHCPs. Have you got any other advice around the legal rights perspective and where funding could be accessed?
Yes, can you hear me okay? Yes, apologies for that. I've had to change camera, so apologies if it's a bit darker. I don't know what's happened there, so thank you for having me back. Yes, so thinking about legal access, home educating families in the UK don't have like a legal entitlement to state funded exams in the same way that school enrolled pupils do. But there are some practical options and some limited support available depending on your kind of location and circumstances. So as we've said, that you're not automatically entitled to publicly funded exams, and local authorities have no legal obligation to fund or arrange exams for home educated students. But there are a few local authorities that can help with some finance. These are few and far between, and it is a bit of a postcode lottery. So it does depend where you are and who your local authority is. Sometimes they might offer to pay for English and maths only as a priority. They might reimburse fees, and they might give you access to like a local pupil referral unit or a centre if you need that. But again, it's down to you asking your local authority and seeing what you have access to. Home educated learners are allowed to register as a private candidate at an approved exam centre. So this could be a private testing centre or a school. But families are responsible for finding that centre, paying the fees, and then providing the suitable evidence for the access arrangements as well. One thing to mention, I think it is worth considering an alternative qualification route such as an IGCSE. These often don't have a coursework or a non-exam assessment component to it, so generally tends to be more accessible for people who are accessing as a private candidate. And also something that is really useful to know is that some online learning providers partner with exam centres and help facilitate that access. So that's definitely something worth looking into when you're thinking about exams for your young person, because that could really help navigate that element for you. But there's kind of thinking about like a typical timeline, shall we say, of how do you go about looking for an exam board and going on and booking it from there. And what I do want to say at this point as well is it might feel like you're getting a lot of information today, but we will be providing a free download at the end of the session today, which has a lot of this information on. So don't worry if it still feels quite overwhelming with all of this information. There is access to follow up afterwards. But thinking about like the steps in looking at exams from a home educating point of view. So you want to make sure you're researching the exam boards, having a look, seeing what's available to you, choosing the subjects and checking if there is a coursework element to it that you need to be aware of, looking for the exam centres that provides access to private candidates. And also, I think it's really important to note here that when you are looking for your exam space to do it in, ask lots of questions. You know, be that person that asks 50 million questions. You know, you are entitled to know the answer to these questions because this is informing your decision whether that place is right for you and your young person. So you want to be asking them, you know, do they accept private candidates? Can they support access arrangements? What are their fees? What are their deadlines? And again, on this download, there's a whole section on listed questions that you could ask your provider as well, just to help you think about the kinds of things that you could be asking. Also, at this early stage, if you are going for access arrangements, and I know we haven't really spoken a lot about that yet, getting your educational assessments in place and your evidence ready to provide to that centre, get that done as early as possible, so that there's no kind of worries about that going forward. And then it's just a case of making sure that you choose where you're going to go, register for the exams, submit your evidence, and then learn the content that you're doing the exam for. Make sure that you've got all of the required ID, you know the exam rules of your centre that you're using. Good tip, do a test run to the exam centre if you've not been there before. One element of stress that you can try and relieve from yourself on the morning of the exam. And make sure that your young person gets good night's sleep and they eat breakfast on the morning before they go. I think these are all really key things to do really before an exam.
Practical tips. And I know a lot of, so we partner, so as an organisation, we organise from end to end the exam process, which is really helpful, obviously, for those who are enrolled with us and studying with us. And we know some of our private exam venues do familiarisation visits, which can be really useful as part of the fee to ensure the young that the travel logistics all work, but the young person knows, well, where's the room I'm going to be, you know, sort of sitting in.
Yeah.
And for a lot of students, that's really important. And I like the fact you brought up the aspect around international GCSEs and international A levels. The practical endorsement for sciences can be a barrier in A levels, unfortunately, because the expense is high. You're hiring, you know, laboratory equipment and so on to use, and you're going to a venue that has all the endorsements around that. So the costs are very expensive. For some students, that's fine. It's a really important aspect of their qualification to have those practical skills. And with an online course such as ours, we build in practical skills that you can do in your home, which is brilliant. So we've got experiments and so on that you can do with generally acceptable resources that you can buy, you know, off the internet. But we also have a suite of international A-levels. All the sciences we do is international A-levels. And as you noted, they don't have the practical endorsement aspect to them. We do advise students to check whether, if they're looking to progress to a university, whether it's a requirement. But a lot of universities are much more accepting of the international A-level as a route, particularly if you're moving into a slightly science-related but not medicine or a key science subject. So it's really good advice. It's about just understanding the landscape, really, isn't it? And knowing these questions. Sometimes you don't know what to ask if you don't know what to ask, do you? So that list of questions that you're going to share, that's really important, because it does inform people. Thank you for the questions coming in. It's really good to see those. We'll just move on a little bit, but we'll come back to the Running Bunny and Helen, if that's okay with your questions, after we've covered off. We might answer some of them as we continue talking, but thank you. Okay, you've given some really good practical advice, Lucie, so thank you for that. On a larger sort of conceptual aspect, I suppose, what barriers would and you probably faced some of these yourself when you were home educating your daughter and looking at how to access exams. There's practical barriers, but there's emotional barriers, there's contextual barriers as well, aren't there? So is there anything there you want to share that would be useful for our audience to understand or just hear from?
Yeah, you're completely right. There are multiple barriers, and anyone who is home educating will be very familiar of the challenges that comes with making that choice of education for your child. Home educating families face multiple systemic barriers and policy gaps when accessing exams. The lack of guaranteed exam access. There's no duty on schools or centres to even accept private candidates. Families need to search independently for centres, find the ones that are willing to accept them. And it can be particularly difficult to find the right centre, especially if you have a learner with a special educational need or disability, or if you're looking for that exam centre that has that specific requirement of coursework, oral exams, science practicals, things like that. The cost burden on families, as I said a moment ago, the home educators, you have to pay all the exam fees, which can be hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So that creates that inequity, especially for lower income families. Despite education being a child's right, we're creating this inequity between people accessing them. Access arrangements must be applied through an exam centre. It can't be directly through the parent or the assessor. So again, we're creating another barrier that needs to be overcome. If the centre refuses or lacks the capacity to support the needs of the child, then that learner is then excluded from a fair exam opportunity. So again, we've got another barrier there. And especially, again, going back to cost, private assessments are really costly, and lots of centres demand probably more evidence than they actually need. And so that can create lots and lots of additional costs for families as well. And a real lack of centralised guidance or support. There's no national framework or single point of contact to help home educating families. If they want to look to find a centre, choose appropriate qualifications, understand deadlines and processes, there's lots of information, but it's everywhere. I will say at this point, the HE wiki page, exams wiki page, is an incredibly great resource for the home educating families. And that does hold a lot of information in one centralised place. But that can be fed into by families, by parents and things like that. So just be aware of the openness of that site when you're looking at the information. But there is an incredible amount of information on there, and I would definitely recommend looking there for further information. But again, families having to navigate the exam systems independently, which can be quite overwhelming as well. And so touching upon policy gaps, there's no public funding for exams, there's no legal right to exams, there's inconsistency, local authority support and roles for home educating family. And there is a bit of a lack of enforcement, JCQ enforcement for private candidate inclusion. The guidelines mention fairness and inclusion, but exam centres are not required to accept private candidates. So there isn't really any formal accountability if a centre turns a family away. So then that element of support behind the family is not there. But Interestingly, if I could just take a moment to draw on some of my own research that I've done in this field, because I conducted a study back in 2023 looking at the barriers to GCSEs for home educated students, so exactly what we're talking about, and the findings very much aligned with what I've spoken about already in the literature that's already out there. And my particular findings were categorized into two themes, so the practicalities and the emotional impact and delivery on families. So the practical elements of challenges were things like distance. You know, families are having to travel far and wide to access GCSE exams. The distance on my particular study ranged between 30 minutes to well over an hour. And I know from conversations with families that this time can actually be a lot higher. The cost and lack of funding was a big issue. And I've got a quote here that I want to read from my study from one of the participants. And they said, it's not just the £200 at the private centre, it's an extra 500 by the time you've put in 2 papers worth of hotels and meals and diesel to get there and childcare and time off work and all the rest of it. And that, I think, really encapsulates the feeling. You know, it's not just feeling like you have to pay for an exam that your child is entitled to, but actually, because they're so far away, you have to travel to do them, because you don't have access to things that are close enough for you to be able to do it in, you know, half a day and things like that. It is taking that time off work. It is paying for childcare. It is an overnight stay, especially if your exams are, you know, one day after another and you're traveling 4 hours to a centre. You're not going to come home and then go back the next day. So that's an overnight stay, dinner, food. And, you know, it's so frustrating as a parent when you're having to fork out all of that when you have chosen to remove your child from school because of a need, or because, you know, the choice that you've chosen. Booking an exam process was another practical challenge for the participants of my study. So they had differing experiences of booking through schools and booking through exam centres, schools sometimes being unreliable, less professional, and maybe not as helpful sometimes, whereas the exam centres being very expensive and with challenges with administration processes and lack of communication. I had a personal experience with trying to book through a school for my daughter that was a horrendous experience, and I ended up not sending her there for her exam, but I was made to feel like I was the problem, and that, I think, is a common issue for a lot of families navigating this. But there were some positives too, but these were just some of the main barriers that people come up with. And then that second theme that I spoke about, that emotional impact and delivery. And as I spoke earlier, some of my study is looking at that home educator identity. So emotion is something that's really important to me to support and look for when looking at home educating families. And the teaching and learning process for home educators, choosing what to do, how to do it, there being a lack of choice of subjects, because being a private candidate, sometimes that does limit your choice to what you can actually take an exam in. The emotional effect of being labelled as weird or hippie because you are from that particular community. And a serious lack of understanding about qualifications. I remember my participants talking about the fact that the wider community didn't understand that their children can still take GCSEs if they don't attend school, and that it was still on par or an equal qualification. So that lack of understanding is something that people really have to contend with. So again, going back to the real important need for visibility and knowledge and trusted knowledge being out there so that people do understand what this landscape actually looks like and how beneficial this way of educating can be for a lot of families. So there's a definite need for more research in this. Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons you founded RECAP, isn't it? That trusted, credible space for research, evidence-based information that the community can go to. Thank you for that. I can hear your passion around, you know, this subject and obviously your own experience. We've got a good number of questions coming in, so thank you, everybody. We will get to them all once we've finished this section. We've talked a little bit about access arrangements. Is that just something you can touch on a little bit, Lucie? Perhaps for some people, the phrase, they may not understand what the phrase means. And obviously we can then answer some questions around it. So we've talked about accessing exams, which is, that's a concept around how you can actually access the examination process. But access arrangements have a specific purpose, and the phrase always mean something from a private candidate perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, so access arrangements. So these are arrangements made to exams for candidates who have a need for them. So it can be a specific learning difficulty, physical disability, sensory impairment, mental health condition, something like that. So it's an additional adjustment made so that these people can access exams in the same way as their peers. So common arrangements will include things like extra time to take the exam, having a reader or a scribe, the use of a word processor, taking rest breaks, things like this. There's a whole list of different types of access arrangements you can get. And again, on that free download, there's a bit more information about the different types of access arrangements as well. So in terms of the steps involved for home educated students to apply for access arrangements, I think there will be some crossover for school-based students as well on some of the areas. But first and foremost, you need to find an exam centre that accepts the private candidates and that they are able to actually support the access arrangement that your young person needs. That's kind of the key first thing that you need to do. And actually contacting them early enough, because adding in access arrangements requires a bit of additional time, additional paperwork, and things like that. So there needs to be enough notice in there. You will need to supply formal documentation. So this can look like an educational psychologist's report. I think they typically ask for it to be within the last 2 years, if I remember correctly.
Lou might be able to clarify that as well, but yes, I think that's correct. Yeah, but thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so it could be something like a report from a specialist assessor on a particular need, a medical report if it's like a mental health need or a physical impairment. Supporting evidence from tutors or parents is helpful to have, but it doesn't stand up as independent evidence. You will need other things to support it around that. But the evidence needs to show the history of the need of the child, the current need of the child, and the child's normal way of working. So how that student typically studies or how they typically take tests, because the access needs to be linked in with their normal way of working. It can't just suddenly be an additional thing that you want to add in. And the JCQ, so the Joint Council for Qualifications, are quite strict with compliance on this. So the assessors must hold the correct qualifications to be accepted for this. But you can ask the exam centre that you've chosen, what is it that they require for evidence for the particular arrangement that you're asking for. But the exam centre, they will submit the application, and because they're submitting it, the exam centre then need to use usually their own SENCO to then see the evidence and approve it, and can have that conversation with you. And then if it's approved, then the centre will confirm to you what's been allowed, and the student will receive the arrangement on the exam day if the centre has agreed to doing it. A few things to keep in mind with access arrangements if you're accessing as a private candidate. So apply early. Don't wait until the exam deadline. Apply as early as you can. Put it as one of your first things to do. Bear in mind, some centres do charge extra for this. And just drawing on my own experience here, so my daughter is autistic and has ADHD. And when we went for her GCSE in a school, so the experience I mentioned a moment ago that wasn't a very positive one, they asked for £90 just to read the letter that I was going to send in as proof of evidence. So it was just one single letter, and they wanted £90 to receive it, and then it would have been additional for the actual access on top of that. So this will differ depending on where you go and what they're asking for. So just bear in mind that there may be an additional cost, and ask what that cost is. Again, going back to that, ask those questions, be that person, ask every question. And then if your child, sorry. No, I was just going to, a couple of more things. I was just going to say, if your child needs a modified paper like Braille, deadlines can be a bit earlier for that as well. So again, going back to doing it nice and early. But yeah, check the guidelines for the specific exam centre and board that you're using as well.
Great advice. And I think the earlier, the better is really, really crucial there, because obviously if you're working with an organisation like NEC or a distance learning provider or an exam venue, there's certain timelines and deadlines they have internally. I think the tricky thing about costs, isn't it, that often organisations are outsourcing to the specialists who are charging a lot now, unfortunately, to oversee that access arrangement process. So it's a really tricky area, and obviously the government needs to really look at that to make sure it is equitable, as you've said. Before we wrap up for Q&A, because I've noticed a lot of questions coming in, so I'd want to really put aside a good amount of time for that. Is there anything else you'd want to pick up on around what RECAP can do? You've talked about having that trusted source of information. Anything there that you want to highlight, Lucie, before we move to the Q&A?
Yeah, so in terms of what RECAP can do to support, so we offer one-to-one support for families to help guide and mentor through any challenges that they have. You know, navigating exams is overwhelming. I remember this as a parent myself. So with a one-to-one support session, it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically for exam preparation, but we can definitely use the time for that. But sometimes it can be helpful to speak to somebody and say, right, these are all the things that I think I need to do. Can we make a plan? And to have someone let you know what your options are out there and where you can look for that advice and support. So we do offer that one-to-one kind of support mentoring element of that. As I said, there is a new free download that was just been launched today in collaboration with this. So that is now available. You'll have the follow-up after today, but it's also on my website so that it can be accessed by everyone on there as well. And most excitingly, later this year, RECAP is launching a brand new platform, and this will provide a space for parents and educators to find reliable, research-informed and evidence-based information and support. So I'd urge any parents listening today, if you want to follow RECAP on socials to stay updated for when this launches. I'm also going to be asking for parents to get involved in some exciting opportunities with RECAP very soon. So make sure that you're following us. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and we've got our current website as well. So you can hear when more information comes out. But yeah, I'm on a mission to get research-informed information really accessible, jargon-free, simplified, so that everyone can see the amazing work that researchers are doing out there in this field, but also can really access and understand it easily.
Fabulous. Thank you, Lucie. Very good. Okay, we're going to bring Louise Tolhurst, the NEC Exams and Assessment Manager, back in for the Q&A. So just to remind you, National Extension College hosting the webinar with Lucie from RECAP. And we're an online distance learning provider providing access to GCSEs and A-levels. And also we have an exam service as part of that, which Louise and her team oversee. So we're going to start off. We've got our first question that came in from the Running Bunny. Are there particular centres that are a better choice if your young person needs significant access arrangements? Example, a scribe. Lucie, do you want to pick up on that first? I think it's going to be a tricky one to answer in aspects, really, isn't it? So Louise may have something to add as well.
Yeah, I think it is a really tricky one, because when it comes down to specific circumstances, it really is going to need speaking to exam places and seeing what they can offer. It's so varied, and this is one of the problems. There's no kind of consistency across the board. So it's varied in terms of what people can offer and how much people can or can't support. So one thing I will say is around kind of questions for specific things like that, it's really useful to get on Facebook and join the groups. And there's a couple of really good exam-based groups, home educators and exam-based groups that have people who are going through it now and people who have been going through it for years and years, and they will be able to say from their lived experiences, this exam centre is really good, this one's really good, this was my experience with that one. So whilst it's important to know what's out there from a kind of information, research, literature perspective, it's really important to ask those questions to actual people going through it as well, get their lived experience. So I'd recommend going onto the Facebook groups and asking on there as well, because you might get some really positive answers.
Great, thank you. Lou, anything from your perspective regarding the differences with exam centres?
Yeah, I think I'd just agree with much of what Lucie said. I mean, not all of our partnership centres, for example, can offer absolutely every access arrangement. And that could be, you know, if you need to have a reader or a scribe, they're going to be, the centre may be limited on space, for example, because you're going to need to be in a separate area because you can't be in the main hall with the rest of the candidates due to the fact that someone needs to be reading or is scribing for you. So again, I think it's starting early, contacting centres, seeing what they can offer. And because a lot of, you know, I know for our candidates, it comes on a first come, first serve basis. You know, even like students that need to use a word processor, centres will only have so many laptops available. So, you know, you want to get in there quickly and have those conversations. And as soon as booking becomes open, you want to kind of get in there and get your name or your child's name down.
Yeah, thank you, Lou. Good. Okay, and this links to that actually from Anne Martin, who to apply for access arrangements when you're using a private centre. So it is the centre that applies for access arrangements, isn't it? Do either of you want to make any comments on that process?
Well, I mean, the only thing I'd say is, so our students, that is, for the most part, is the case. If they're going through one of our partner centres, the partner centre will be the person that's collecting the evidence, requesting more evidence, or putting in place certain things to gather the evidence, and they'll make that application on your behalf. But if you're working with a distance learning provider and you're doing a subject that's got coursework, for example, so our students that are studying, for example, A-level history, we're the entering centre. So we would make the entry so that we can then deal with all of the requirements to do with coursework. And then we would make the access arrangement application, and then they'd be the student would then be transferred out to a centre of their choice where they could sit those written exams. But definitely for the most part, it's the exams, the centre.
Yeah, it's a good point to note. Not all providers of distance learning or home educating curriculums are registered exam venues as well and can deal with the NEAs. So we are, which is great. So we maintain those quality benchmarks that JCQ require. We don't generally house exams in our centre, but we are an approved centre, which means students feel the comfort of working with the tutor up to the point of the NEA being submitted. And then, as Lou said, it's a process that Lou and the team are very familiar with. It's then transferred, the entry's transferred to the actual venue where the student's going to sit the written paper. So good. Anything to add on that, Lucy? You're good.
No, I think you've covered it off well. The only other thing to mention is obviously sometimes people go through schools, so you would be liaising with the school on that front if you were accessing kind of your local school in that sense.
And it's one of the first things we do say to students who are coming to us, perhaps who are relatively new to stepping out of what we sort of standard education, looking at home educating, is really when you've still got that communication going with the school, ask whether they would be willing, even though you're away, whether they'd still be willing for the child to sit.
Often, they have that evidence. And I think this is a lot, this does come up where potentially where a child has been in a centre or at a school for GCSEs and a parent hasn't really known about all of the process that's gone on behind the scenes, and then they're then being home educated for A-levels, and suddenly then they're being asked for X, Y and Z and they don't know where to gather that evidence from. So I think if there's a connection to a local school or a college, you know, it's worth exploring that first maybe.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think schools are a really good option for a number of different reasons. And like you've said, if you were a pupil at that school, you've now moved away, they know your child, they've got the evidence. Even if you want to take the exam at a school, you don't have to have attended the school. Just to make that clear, you can approach any school and ask them, do they take private candidates? So your child doesn't have to have previously attended for you to take the exam there. But what you will also find is I have heard a lot of occasions where going to the schools, they can be really accommodating. They can really embrace taking in private candidates. And whereas an exam centre, you know, it's a business, their core business is providing exams, so they have administration costs that they put on, so the costs can quite easily rack up. Whereas going into a school, It's down to the discretion of the school whether they just charge you for the cost of the exam, the individual exam, or whether they put admin charges on top of that as well. And some schools will just charge you for the exam, so that can really bring your costs down as well. So it is worth having those conversations with the schools around where you live and see if you can build up that relationship and do it that way.
Really good point. I think, as you said, some of the groups, Facebook groups, they may already have that information for your locality. So great. I'm conscious of time. So Fiona, we're going to take a note of and we'll send you some information on international A levels, because we're an online college. So there's slightly different rules that apply for us. So we'll get something directly to you on that. Some of these we can answer not relatively quickly, but they're quite simple questions. So Nath, you've asked, are parents allowed to accompany a child into the centre, not into the exam room? Lou, you've got experience of that, haven't you?
I mean, it depends on the centre. So, I mean, certainly you'd be able to walk in with them and to maybe the reception area at the very least. You know, some of our centres, you know, one of our centres in Cambridge, they do a lot of their exams in their big sort of cricket hall, which is separate from the school. So you would be able to take them to the door there. But for our centres, most of them offer those familiarisation sessions where you can go and have a walk around and become a bit more familiar with where you'd need to go. And so it's certainly, I would recommend that you would ask that as well, particularly if there is that anxiety about kind of being in that, you know, a big, maybe scary building on your own. So,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And Nath, you've got questions about, quite specific ones about practical sciences, and then how long the exams are for, if you were taking 5 to 6 GCSEs, it's quite a long time. Lou, do you want to pick up the practical science, and perhaps Lucie?
Yeah, so there are centres that can offer the practical science. There tends to be, I find, a lot more issues with people who are trying to find centres that will accept them for GCSE sciences, because the entering centre has to be able to confirm that you've completed the practical element of that, and they can't. But for A levels, also just going back, what I would say is thinking about the IGCSE sciences. So, for example, NEC offers biology, chemistry, and physics IGCSE, and hasn't got that requirement. And I know that lots of home educated students do pick that because of that reason. But there are centres that can offer the whole deal for A level sciences, and then there are centres that can offer you just the practical, and then it can be attached to the centre that can do the written exams. But again, that's making sure that you ask those questions and that your written centre is happy to accept that practical endorsement. So yes,
use an organisation like a distance learning provider or somebody that's picking that whole piece up, because it can become quite complex, those little nuances of how to work that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So 5 to 6 GCSEs, that's a long exam period. Lucie, how would you advise Nath on that?
Again, this depends on where you are, who you're going with. Obviously, when you take exams and you register for them, you'll be given an indication as to when your exams are going to take place, and you need to take into consideration how much time does your young person need to revise for that particular exam. You know, people can do exams in short periods of time. I've spoken to families where their young person has spent a number of months looking over the content and then taking the exam, and doing it in a very short space of time. Some parents will encourage their young person to do it over a number of years and then take an exam. It really depends on your young person as to how you approach booking the exams and how long you take. One of the great things about home education is that you can spread it across, so you don't necessarily have to take 5 or 6 in 1 year in one sitting. You know, you can take these over 2, 3, 4 years if you want to, whatever works best for your young person. So I think that's first worth looking at in terms of how you want to apply it that way.
Thank you.
And I think it's worth just thinking about that a number of IGCSEs and a few GCSEs you can do in November. So it's as long as you meet the criteria, you know, that's worth thinking about as well. And just taking into consideration if there are things like oral exams for IGCSE languages or GCSE languages, there will be a separate window for that. So whereas the main examination windows from this year, I think it's the 5th of May to the 25th of June, there will be an earlier period by which you may be called to the examination centre to do the oral exam. So it's just taking that into account, really. But the timetables are released, many months in advance. So it's worth having a look at those and seeing when those exams are happening, and just making sure that you're looking at not a provisional timetable, you're looking at the final timetable, and then taking it from there to decide how much time you're going to space the exams out over.
Thank you. Thanks. Now,
I think as well, sorry,
Lucy. Yep.
I just want to add one thing, which I think it will be really helpful to everybody listening. If you haven't come across HECA yet, the Home Educators Qualifications Association, they are incredibly good. They conduct their own research as well, specifically around exams for home educators. They've got a lot of information and can provide some support there as well. So it's definitely worth looking there for specific questions around exams for home educators too.
Thank you. That's HEQA. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Nath, yes, IGCSEs are recognised as GCSEs. So that's a simple answer to that, but we can follow up. We'll be following up with everybody on email, so you can ask some more specific questions from that perspective. Mock exams. So many centres do, from a commercial perspective, provide mock exam services, and some organisations do online mock exams as well. Just if you're really looking at the exam craft, can you fit all those answers sort of into that time scale? So it's best if you've chosen a centre to look and ask the centre whether they have a mock exam service, but it would be a paid service from that perspective. How do you evidence a home ed learner's usual way of working? Lou, do you want to pick that up first? This is talking about access arrangements, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, this has been a new one for us this year. So this year we have taken some home educated students on for exams that haven't necessarily been studying with NEC. So there are things that an examination centre can do. They do sometimes hold some sort of mock exams themselves to maybe be able to evidence that a student needs some additional time in their exam paper. They'll look at all of the evidence that you're able to provide. If you've got something like an EHCP, that will have evidence within there about your need. If you're working with a private tutor or anything like that, that will all help. Obviously, if you are working in any way with a distance learning provider, I mean, we provide a letter for our students that confirms that their usual way of working is X, Y, and Z. But it is possible. So we have had, as I say, lots of students this year who aren't NEC students and aren't working with a distance learning provider, and it hasn't been too much of a headache to kind of gather that, as long as you have evidence that details your need.
Lovely, thanks. Anything to add to that, Lucy?
No, I think you've covered that off well.
Good. And does this, Viking Snowflake, thanks, does this apply for adult learners who have access needs? So I think this is all the same space, isn't it? It doesn't change if you're over 18, 19 or 25, depending on when your EHCP, if there is one, has finished. So my understanding is access arrangements are the same whatever age. Yeah. Super, thank you. So a specific thing, and there's a couple here about timelines actually, so we'll pick that up. We've all kept saying apply early. A couple of people are asking, what does that actually mean? Any thoughts on that? Lucy, do you want to pick on that first?
I would say at a minimum 6 months, if not more.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Sooner the better.
Louise, anything to add?
I'd say even sooner. So the difficulty is that, so I think someone mentioned they're studying with NEC. So our access arrangement application for 2026 will be coming out next month. So we've brought that forward because our standard application used to come out in September, sort of end of August, beginning of September. And we found that even if you were the first person to apply in September and request certain access arrangements, the centre would already be full because they've had people waiting for it for months and months and months. So we brought it forward. So for us, I would say as soon as that application comes out in June, fill it in and get it there, and we can then have those conversations about evidence and checking that the centre can accommodate whatever it is that's needed. It is, again, I think we'd mentioned earlier about deadlines. Yes, there's an awarding body deadline, but you've got to pay close attention to the centre's deadline. And also bear in mind, if it's on a first come, first served basis, that you know, although their deadline may be, I don't know, the 7th of January, they may have become full at the 7th of December, you know. So I think as soon as those applications, they start accepting applications, apply. You know, once obviously you've gathered all of your evidence, particularly the more access arrangements that you need.
Yeah,
so
thank you. And from an organisation like ourselves, you'd get an email. We have a forum platform, and you get lots of alerts. So no sparklers you're asking because you're a student. You're looking after a student who's enrolled with us. You get lots of emails and notifications saying the exam application will be opening soon. And also at the point of if you're using a distance learning provider, at the point of enrolment, if you say actually there may be access arrangements required, then you're really looked after. Then you're noted. It's something that, you know, early on the conversation can start. So it's as early as possible. Lucy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as soon as you're having that conversation with the exam centre that you've chosen to book in with, that should be the first conversation, one of the first conversations that you have. Ask them, what are their deadlines? What do they need? Can they provide it? And just get it done as soon as possible to avoid any kind of confusion down the line.
Yeah. And just bear in mind, although I'm saying our application comes out next month, obviously at the moment exam centres are dealing with, you know, their busiest time of the year. So trying to get hold of people right now can be tricky. So just to kind of bear that in mind and just be persistent, I think. But, you know, you need to kind of get those answers. It's really important to ask those questions early on.
Thank you. I wonder if we can, thank you for the questions. They'll all be noted, and we will be emailing out to everybody some information. So Lucy, you've got a QR code, which is going to be up in the screen in a minute, with some really key information that those who are on the call can access, and anybody watching back, they can still access the QR code. But anyone who booked through Eventbrite, we will be sending information out as a follow-up on an email. We can continue the conversation then if needed. And Lucy, you're happy for people to email you, so we'll be putting up your email address as well, and obviously from a National Extension College perspective, people can email into us as well if they're focused on the GCSE A-level requirement, and obviously with Lucy it's the more wide range of support and information that Lucy can support with. It sounds like you've got lots of exciting things coming up over the years as well. I'm just wondering, shall we end on a positive, I suppose? I mean, it is wonderful that obviously home education is growing and that there are options now for flexible education for students who just not finding their needs are being met in what is a traditional school environment. Anything, Lucy, you want to wrap up with that you feel is a positive comment to make around this community and this sector and what everybody's having to navigate around education at the moment?
Yeah, I think one of the key things I'd like to say is community is key. So definitely get out there, speak to other people that are doing it, join the Facebook groups, ask the questions, give advice if you have answers to other people's questions, and really engage in that community, because the information is out there for you to access, but people's lived experiences are incredibly valuable as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining, and those for watching. This will be available immediately on the NEC YouTube channel, and I'm sure Lucy will grab the link if anybody contacts Lucy directly and be able to share that with you. So if there's anything that you want to look back at, please do, but you will be able to receive information on the areas that we've discussed. And we will get back to each of you and pick up on the questions you've had. Thank you for being so engaged. It's obviously a really important topic for everybody, and thank you for spending this hour with us. Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Louise.
Thank you.